You left them for dead. I have to start there with the truth, because I was one of you, one of the ones who walked away from those cubs and told ourselves we had no choice, and I have spent the rest of my life carrying what we did, and the only way I know to carry it is to tell the truth about it. We left the cubs for dead. Our own young, the orphaned ones, the ones too small and too weak to keep up with the evacuation. We left them behind on a dying world, because our way taught us that the strong survive and the weak are a burden the strong cannot afford. We told ourselves it was mercy or necessity or the hard wisdom of our people. It was none of those things. It was abandonment. And the humans found what we abandoned and took the cubs in and raised them. And what they raised those cubs into is the thing I have to tell you about, because it is not what you fear, and it is not what we deserved, and it broke my heart and remade it both, the day I finally saw what had become of the children we left to die. Let me tell you who I am, so you understand that this is a confession and not a boast. My name is Karuthek, and I am Vssk, a predator people, a proud people, a people whose whole civilization was built on strength and the survival of the strong. We came from a brutal homeworld, and our ancestors survived it by being hard, by understanding that in a harsh universe the weak perish and the strong endure, and we carried that understanding into the stars and made it the law of our entire way of life. The Vssk did not coddle weakness. We did not waste resources on those who could not contribute. We honored strength and discarded weakness, and we believed, I believed, that this was not cruelty but wisdom, the hard, clear-eyed wisdom of a people who had survived a universe that does not forgive softness. I believed it completely. I believed it right up until the day the humans showed me what our wisdom had actually cost us, and what their softness had actually built. Let me tell you about the day we left them. It is the worst day of my life, and I will not soften it, because softening it would be another abandonment. There was a war. The details do not matter. A war we were losing, a Vssk colony world falling to an enemy too strong for us, and an evacuation, desperate and chaotic, too few ships and too little time and too many people trying to flee a dying world. And in the chaos there were the cubs, the orphaned young, whose parents had died in the fighting, small Vssk children with no one to carry them and no place on the overcrowded ships. And our leaders made the decision that our way had always taught us to make, the decision that I, to my eternal shame, did not contest, that the ships would carry the strong, the able, the ones who could fight and work and contribute to the survival of the Vssk, and that the orphaned cubs who were small and weak and would consume resources without contributing would be left behind, left for the enemy, or for the dying world, or for whatever fate awaited the abandoned. We left them. Hundreds of orphaned cubs crying out for us as the ships rose, and we closed the doors and we left them on that dying world, and we told ourselves it was necessary, and we flew away, and I have heard those cubs crying in my sleep every night for the rest of my life. I want to be honest about something because the honesty is the whole point. I did not protest the decision, but I did not believe in it either, not fully, not in the place where belief actually lives. I told myself it was necessary, the way you do, but some part of me even then knew it was wrong, knew that whatever our way taught about the strong and the weak, leaving terrified orphaned children to die on a dying world, was a thing no wisdom could justify. I felt it and I silenced it and I flew away with the rest, and I carried the silence thing inside me like a stone for years. We all did, I think. We did not speak of it. The Vssk who fled that world did not talk about the cubs we left behind. We folded the shame into our hard, clear-eyed wisdom, and we told ourselves we had done what had to be done, and we did not look at the thing we had done, because to look at it would be to know it for what it was. And we believed the cubs were dead. That was the thing that let us live with it, the small mercy of assumption. We believed the cubs had died on that dying world, that there was nothing to be done for them and they were gone, and that our abandonment, however terrible, was at least final, a thing that could not be undone and so did not have to be faced. The dead do not accuse you to your face. The dead let you tell yourself your story about necessity. As long as the cubs were dead, we could carry the shame quietly and never have to see what our abandonment had truly meant. But the cubs were not dead. That is the thing I learned years later, the thing that began the remaking of everything I believed, because the humans had been there. Not at the evacuation, they came after, a human expedition arriving at the fallen world in the aftermath of the war, surveying the wreckage of a Vssk colony the way expeditions do. And the humans found the cubs. The orphaned Vssk children we had left for dead, still alive, some of them, the ones who had survived the days alone on the dying world, frightened and starving and abandoned, the children of a people who had decided they were not worth saving. And the humans did the thing that no Vssk would ever have done, the thing that was incomprehensible to our whole way of being. They saved them. They gathered up the abandoned cubs of a species not their own, the orphaned young that the cubs' own people had written off as not worth the resources, and they took them in. They took them home. They raised them. I did not know this for years. I learned it the way you learn the things that change your life, suddenly and without warning, long after you have made your peace with a lie. And what I learned was not just that the cubs had lived, that alone would have undone me. What I learned was what the humans had made of them, what those abandoned Vssk children had become in the care of the soft species we had always looked down on. The humans took the cubs we left for dead, and they turned them into warriors. That part of the story is true, and it is the part that everyone seizes on, the part that sounds like vengeance, like a threat, like the abandoned children coming back as weapons to punish the people who abandoned them. But the truth of what kind of warriors the humans made, and what those warriors did, when at last they stood before the people who had left them to die, is the thing I have to tell you, because it is not vengeance, and it is not what we feared, and it is the most humbling thing I have ever witnessed. Let me tell you what became of the cubs we left for dead, and what the humans turned them into, and what they did with the strength their abandoners had thrown away. I learned what the humans had made of the cubs from one of the humans themselves, a woman named Sarah who had been part of the expedition that found them, and who had, I would come to understand, helped raise them, become a mother to children of a species not her own. I met her years later, through circumstances I will explain in time, and she told me the story of what the humans had done, and every word of it was a stone laid on the grave of my old certainties. She told me how they had found the cubs. The expedition had come to the fallen Vssk world expecting to survey wreckage, and instead they had found the survivors, the orphaned cubs, the ones strong enough to have lived through the days of abandonment, huddled in the ruins of the colony, starving, half feral with terror and grief. And the humans had not hesitated. Sarah told me this part very simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the universe, which to the humans it apparently was. They were children. They were alone. We weren't going to leave them. You don't leave children. You don't leave children. She said it like a law of nature, like a thing so basic it did not need explaining, and I felt the weight of it, because it was the exact opposite of the law my own people lived by, and she stated it as though the opposite were unthinkable, as though leaving children were not a hard necessity, but a thing that simply was not done ever, by anyone who could call themselves a person. They took the cubs home, to Earth, to the human worlds, and they raised them, not in some facility, not as specimens or as a project, but as children distributed among human families who took the orphaned Vssk young into their homes and raised them as their own. Sarah took several. She told me about them, the cubs she had raised, with the fierce, tender pride of a mother, and I sat and listened to a human woman speak of the love she had given to the children my people had thrown away. And I did not know how to hold it, the enormity of it, the simple, unbearable fact that the cubs we had left to die had been, all those years, growing up loved in the homes of strangers who owed them nothing. And here is the thing the title of this story gets right and that everyone misunderstands. The humans did raise the cubs into warriors. That is true. The Vssk are a warrior people by nature, and the cubs carried that nature in them, the strength and the fierceness and the capacity for war that was their inheritance, and the humans did not suppress it. They could have raised the cubs to be gentle, to be soft, to be unlike the predator people they came from, but they did not. They raised them to be warriors because that was true to what the cubs were, and the humans, Sarah told me, believed in raising a child to be most fully themselves, not in remaking a child into something else. So the cubs grew up strong and fierce and skilled in war, true warriors, every bit as formidable as the Vssk who had abandoned them. The humans turned the abandoned cubs into warriors. But, and this is everything, this is the whole heart of it, they raised them to be a kind of warrior the Vssk had never been. Because the Vssk understood warriorhood as dominance. To us, a warrior was a predator, a being whose strength entitled him to take, to rule, to discard the weak and seize what he wanted, to stand at the top of the order of strength and look down on everything beneath him. That was what strength was for in the Vssk way, for winning, for dominating, for surviving at the expense of the weak. And the humans, raising the abandoned Vssk cubs into warriors, taught them something completely different about what their strength was for. Sarah told me how they did it, how the human families raised these fear-strong children, and the lesson was simple, and it was the opposite of everything the Vssk believed. They taught the cubs that strength is for protection, that a warrior's purpose is not to dominate the weak but to shield them, that the whole point of being strong, the only thing that makes strength anything other than a curse, is to use it to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The humans took the predator nature of the Vssk cubs and they did not break it, but they aimed it away from domination and toward protection, taught those fierce children that the strongest thing a warrior can do is not to take but to defend, not to abandon the weak, but to stand between the weak and the things that would harm them. We didn't make them soft, Sarah told me. People think kindness makes you soft, and it doesn't. We made them strong as you could ever want a warrior to be. We just taught them what the strength was for. Your people taught them, would have taught them. That strength is for surviving, for winning, for leaving the weak behind so the strong can make it. We taught them the opposite. That strength is for the weak. That the whole reason to be strong is so that nobody ever has to be left behind again. The strongest warrior isn't the one who survives by abandoning others. It's the one strong enough to make sure no one gets abandoned at all. That's what we taught them. That's the kind of warriors we raised. Not warriors who leave the weak for dead. Warriors who would die before they left anyone behind, because they know, better than anyone alive, what it feels like to be the one who gets left. Because they know what it feels like to be the one who gets left. That sentence went through me like a blade. Because of course, the cubs we had abandoned knew, in their very bones, the thing that no Vssk warrior had ever been taught to feel. They knew what it was to be the weak one left behind to die. They had lived it. They had been the orphaned children crying out as the ships rose and the doors closed. And the humans, raising them, had taken that wound, the deepest wound a person can carry, the wound of having been abandoned by your own people, and had healed it not by making the cubs hard, the way the Vssk would have, but by transforming it into its opposite, into a fierce protective tenderness, a warrior's strength wedded to an absolute refusal to ever let anyone suffer the abandonment they had suffered. The cubs we left for dead grew up into warriors whose entire purpose, whose deepest driving conviction, was that no one should ever be left behind, because they knew, as no one else could know, exactly what being left behind costs. I wept listening to Sarah. I am not ashamed to say it, though weeping is not the Vssk way. I wept, because I understood finally and completely the enormity of what we had done, and the enormity of what the humans had done in answer to it. We had looked at those cubs and seen weakness, a burden, resources we could not afford. The humans had looked at the same cubs and seen children who needed saving, and then they had raised those children into the very thing our people most admired and least deserved, into warriors, true warriors, strong and fierce and formidable. But warriors of a kind we had never imagined and could never have produced, because the strength we worshipped was a strength for taking, and the strength the humans gave the cubs was a strength for protecting. And the difference between those two things is the difference between everything the Vssk were and everything we should have been. And then Sarah told me why she was telling me all this, why a human woman had sought out an old Vssk who had been part of the abandonment, to tell him the story of the children he had helped to leave for dead. Because the cubs were grown now. The warriors the humans had raised were grown and capable, and they had learned the truth of their own history, learned that they were Vssk, learned what had happened to them, learned that their own people had left them to die. And they were coming. Not for vengeance, Sarah said. She was very clear about that, and I did not believe her then, because I could not imagine that abandoned children grown into warriors would come for anything but vengeance. They were coming, Sarah said, for a reason I would not understand until I saw it with my own eyes, a reason that was the final and most humbling proof of what the humans had made of them. Let me tell you what happened when the cubs we left for dead, grown now into warriors, finally came back to the people who had abandoned them, and what they did, which was not vengeance, and which I will carry in my remade heart for the rest of my life. I have to tell you the circumstances of the return, because the circumstances are everything, because the cubs we abandoned did not come back to a Vssk people at the height of our strength, looking for the ones who had wronged them. They came back to find us in the worst moment of our history, and what they found us in is the thing that made what they did unbearable in its mercy. The Vssk were losing again. Years after we abandoned the cubs, the war that had been going against us had gone against us completely. The same enemy that had taken the colony world had pressed us back year after year, until the Vssk were a people in retreat, our worlds falling, our strength broken, our proud civilization of the survival of the strong discovering, at last, what it is to be the weak ones facing a stronger power. There is a terrible justice in it that I felt even then. We who had built our whole way of life on the strong surviving and the weak perishing had become, ourselves, the weak, facing an enemy who looked at us exactly the way we had always looked at those beneath us, as prey, as a burden, as something to be swept aside. And it was in that moment, the Vssk broken and retreating, a great mass of our people trapped on a falling world with too few ships and the enemy closing in, the exact situation in which we had once abandoned the cubs, now turned upon us, that the warriors came. The cubs we had left for dead, grown now, trained by the humans into the most formidable warriors any of us had ever seen, arrived at the falling Vssk world in the middle of our defeat, descending out of the sky into the worst moment of our people's history. And I was there. By the circumstances of war I was there on that falling world, one of the trapped, one of the weak now facing abandonment myself, and I watched the warriors come and I knew them for what they were. The abandoned cubs returned and I felt, along with everyone else, the certainty that vengeance had finally arrived. We had left them for dead. Now they had come in our moment of weakness to do to us what we had done to them. It was justice. It was the law of the strong and the weak that we had always lived by, come round at last to claim us. We waited to be abandoned, or worse, by the children we had abandoned. That is not what they did. The warriors came down into the falling world, into the chaos of the Vssk defeat, and they did not come to take vengeance. They came to do the thing the humans had raised them to do, the thing their entire warrior's purpose had been shaped around, the thing that no Vssk warrior in our history would ever have done. They came to save us, to evacuate us, to stand between the trapped Vssk and the closing enemy and get our people off that dying world, the same people who had left them to die on a dying world years before. They came as protectors. They came as the warriors the humans had made them, warriors whose strength was for shielding the weak, and they looked at the Vssk, broken, defeated, weak, the very people who had abandoned them, and they did not see the enemies who had wronged them. They saw people who needed saving, and they saved us. I cannot describe to you what it was to watch it. The abandoned cubs, grown into warriors, fighting to protect the people who had abandoned them, holding the line against the enemy while the Vssk evacuated, carrying our wounded, our elderly, our young, our weak, onto their ships, refusing to leave anyone behind. Refusing to leave anyone behind. The phrase that had been our shame became their glory. Where we had left hundreds of orphaned cubs to die, they left no one. Not one Vssk, not the weakest, not the least, not even the ones who had been part of the abandonment. They got everyone off that world. They spent their strength, their formidable human-trained warriors' strength, entirely in the service of saving the people who had thrown them away, and they did it without a word of reproach, without vengeance, without making us pay. They simply saved us, all of us, the way they had been saved, the way they had been raised to believe everyone deserved to be saved. And I found one of them. In the chaos of the evacuation, I came face to face with one of the warriors, a young Vssk in human-made armor, fierce and strong and magnificent, and I knew, I do not know how I knew, but I knew that this was one of the cubs from that world, one of the children we had left, and I could not bear it. I fell to the ground before this warrior, this child I had helped abandon, and I confessed. I told him who I was, what I had done, that I had been part of the evacuation that left them, that I had heard their cries and closed the doors and flown away, that I was one of the ones who had left him for dead. I told him because I could not stand to be saved by him without his knowing what I was. I expected his rage. I wanted his rage, I think. I wanted to be punished, wanted the justice of his hatred, because it would have been easier to bear than his mercy. And the warrior looked down at me, this child I had abandoned grown into a being who held my life in his hands, and what was in his face was not rage. It was something I had no name for, something the Vssk had no name for, because it was a thing our hard wisdom had never allowed us to feel. He reached down and he lifted me to my feet, gently, the way you lift someone you do not intend to harm, and he said the thing that broke me open completely, the thing I will carry to my death. He said, I know who you are, I know what you did. I've known my whole life that my own people left me to die. I grew up knowing it, and I won't pretend it didn't hurt, because it did. It hurt more than anything. But the people who raised me taught me something, and I'm going to do for you what they did for me, whether you understand it or not. They taught me that you don't leave people behind. Not the weak ones, not the ones who can't keep up, and not even the ones who left you, especially not them, maybe. Because if I leave you here to die, then I've decided you were right, that the strong leave the weak, that's just how it works, that abandonment is wisdom. And I won't give you that. I won't prove you right. You left me for dead, and I'm going to save your life, and the difference between those two things is everything I am. Now get on the ship. Nobody gets left behind, not even you. Nobody gets left behind, not even you. Let me tell you what happened after the evacuation. What became of the Vssk, saved by the children we had abandoned, and what it did to my people to be rescued by the very weakness we had thrown away, and what I came to understand in the end about strength and abandonment, and the two different things that a warrior can be made to mean. Because the story does not end with the rescue. It ends with what the rescue taught a whole people who had been wrong about everything, and with the slow remaking of a civilization that had built itself on a lie, and that a generation of abandoned children, raised by humans into a better kind of strength, came home to teach the truth. They saved all of us. I have to say it plainly, because the scale of it is the thing that finally broke the old Vssk certainty for good. Every Vssk on that falling world, everyone, the strong and the weak, the warriors and the wounded, the elderly and the young and the ones like me who had been part of the abandonment years before, every single one of us got off that world alive, carried out by the warriors we had left for dead. They lost some of their own doing it. That is the part I can barely speak of. Some of the cubs we had abandoned died on that world, saving the people who had abandoned them, spending their lives to rescue the very Vssk who had once decided their lives were not worth saving. They died protecting their abandoners. And when I learned that children we had left to die had grown up and come back and died to save us, the last of my old wisdom, the hard, clear-eyed wisdom of the survival of the strong, crumbled to nothing, because it could not survive the sight of what real strength actually looked like. And real strength looked like an abandoned child dying to save the people who abandoned him. The Vssk were never the same after that day. How could we be? We had been rescued, our whole people, our broken, retreating civilization, by the embodiment of everything we had thrown away. We had built our entire way of life on the conviction that the weak must be left behind so the strong can survive. And we had been saved from destruction by warriors whose entire creed was that no one must ever be left behind, including us, including the weak, including the ones who had done the abandoning. The contradiction could not be held. You cannot keep believing that strength means leaving the weak to die after the weak you left to die have grown strong and come back to refuse to leave you to die. The lie died on that world, in the moment of our rescue, and something new began to grow in the space where it had been. The warriors stayed after the evacuation. The cubs we had abandoned, grown now, did not save us and then leave. They stayed, and they did the harder thing, the thing that actually remade us. They taught us. They taught the Vssk the thing the humans had taught them, the thing our people had never known. That strength is for protection, that a warrior's purpose is to shield the weak and not to dominate them, that the measure of a people is not how ruthlessly they discard their burdens but how fiercely they refuse to abandon anyone. They taught us, the abandoned children teaching their abandoners, and we learned, slowly, painfully, the way a people learns when it has been shown beyond denying that everything it believed was wrong. The Vssk began to change. We began to become something we had never been, a people whose strength served the weak, a warrior people who measured themselves not by who they could leave behind but by who they could carry. It was the cubs who taught us, the ones we left for dead. They came back not to punish us for our wisdom but to free us from it, and the freeing was the greatest gift our people ever received. I spoke with the warrior again, the one who had lifted me to my feet, the one I had confessed to. His name, I learned, was Tain, a human name, given to him by the human family who had raised him, and he had kept it, an abandoned Vssk cub carrying a human name as a sign of where his real family was. And I asked him, the question I had to ask, the question that was the whole of my remade heart. I asked him how he could not hate us, how he could look at the people who had left him as a child to die, and feel anything but the rage I knew I would have felt, the rage I deserved. And Tain gave me the answer that is the last thing I will tell you, the truest thing I have ever heard, the thing that contains the whole meaning of what the cubs we abandoned became. He said, I did hate you for a long time. When I was young, when I first learned what had happened, I hated you with everything I had, the people who left me, who left all of us, who decided we weren't worth saving. I wanted to come back and make you pay. I dreamed about it. He paused. And my mother, my human mother, Sarah, she let me hate you for a while. She didn't tell me not to. She just let me feel it, all of it, until I'd felt it all the way through. And then one day she asked me a question. She asked me, when you go back and make them pay, when you become the thing that abandons them, that decides their lives don't matter, that leaves them to die, who have you become? You've become them. You've become exactly the thing that hurt you. The thing you hate most in the universe you've turned into. And I understood. Hating you, hurting you, leaving you, it would have made me into you. The only way to not become the thing that abandoned me was to refuse to abandon anyone, ever, including you. So I'm not merciful because I'm better than you, Karuthek. I'm merciful because I refuse to become you. Saving you was the only way to stay myself. The day I leave someone to die is the day I finally lose to the people who left me, and I will never give them that win. Never, not even by hating them. The only way to not become the thing that abandoned me was to refuse to abandon anyone. I have built the rest of my life around that. Because it is the deepest truth I know now, the truth that we made a whole people, that the wounds done to us do not have to become the wounds we do to others, that the abandoned can refuse to abandon, that the child left for dead can grow into the warrior who leaves no one behind, and that this refusal, this choice to not become the thing that hurt you, is the strongest thing a person can do, stronger than any vengeance, stronger than any domination, the strongest strength there is. You left them for dead, and humans took the cubs in and turned them into warriors. That is how the story is told, and it is true, and almost everyone who hears it expects the ending we Vssk expected, the abandoned children returning as weapons, the warriors coming back for vengeance, the satisfying terrible justice of the abandoners getting what they deserved. That is not what happened. The humans did turn the cubs into warriors, formidable, strong, every bit the warriors their Vssk blood made them. But they turned them into a kind of warrior the universe had too few of, warriors whose strength was for protecting, warriors who would die before leaving anyone behind, warriors forged not in the hatred of those who wronged them but in the refusal to become them. And when those warriors came back to the people who had left them for dead, they did not bring vengeance. They brought rescue. They saved their abandoners, and some of them died doing it, and they remade a whole civilization that had been wrong about the meaning of strength for its entire history, remade it not by conquering it, but by saving it and by teaching it, at last, the thing the humans had taught them. We thought strength was for surviving, and we left our children to die to prove it. The humans taught those children that strength is for protecting, and the children came back and saved us. And in the saving, they taught us what we should have always known, that a people is not measured by the weak it can afford to abandon, but by the weak it refuses to leave behind. That the strongest warrior is not the one who survives by leaving others to die. It is the one strong enough and brave enough and good enough to make sure that no one ever gets left behind again. We left them for dead. They came back and they left no one, not even us. And that in the end is the whole difference between what we were and what they became. We measured our strength by who we could abandon, and they measured theirs by who they could save. The humans taught them that, and then they taught us. And a people who had been monsters in the name of strength learned, from the children we had thrown away, how to finally become strong enough to be good. Nobody gets left behind, not even you. I have heard those words every day since, the way I once heard the cubs crying. But these words do not torment me. These words saved me, saved all of us, and they are the truest measure of strength I have ever known, taught to a hard, cruel people by the soft, kind humans, and carried home to us by the children we left for dead, who came back not with vengeance, but with the one thing we had never given them and never deserved, and needed more than anything in the universe. They came back with mercy, and they left no one behind.